When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I was stepping into the very picture of suburban perfection. The houses were neatly aligned, lawns trimmed with military precision, and not a trash can was ever left out past collection day. On the surface, it seemed like the kind of community where people cared about appearances, order, and a sense of safety. The kind of place where you could breathe easy knowing everything was in control. But that image of perfection was only skin deep. Underneath the manicured grass and pristine fences lurked something far darker, an HOA board that believed they were the judge, jury, and executioner of anyone daring to live within their carefully painted lines. Their word was law, and those who didn't bow to their demands found themselves suffocated by fines, warnings, and intimidation. I had seen signs of their arrogance early on, but at the time, I brushed it off. A warning letter about the wrong shade of blinds in my guest bedroom. A notice that my mailbox didn't meet the community aesthetic. Trivial things. Petty. Things that wouldn't rattle most people, but still felt designed to push you into compliance. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined, was that I wasn't just some homeowner with no defenses. I wasn't just another person they could bully into paying whatever fines they conjured up. I wasn't their average target. I was the chief of police. But I never wore that title on my sleeve in the neighborhood. To me, home was supposed to be a place to disconnect, to live quietly, to not think about the badge, the uniform, or the daily grind of law enforcement. So when I first got those passive-aggressive letters from the HOA, I treated them like static in the background. Noise. Nothing more. Still, the noise grew louder. Each week, it seemed another violation showed up in my mailbox. One week it was a supposed oil stain on my driveway. The next, a claim that my hedges weren't trimmed to regulation height. Then, a bizarre warning that my dog's bark was disruptive to the harmony of the community. At first, it was annoying. Then it was laughable. But soon, it turned into something else entirely, a pattern of harassment. I'd come home late from long shifts and see HOA board members standing at the corner of my street, clipboards in hand, scribbling notes like watchdogs of some twisted regime. Their eyes lingered on my house longer than the others. I knew what they were doing. They were trying to build a case, brick by brick, until I either bent to their authority or broke under the pressure. But I had no intention of breaking. One evening, I decided to test just how far they would go. I left my trash bin at the curb overnight, something I'd seen 3 other neighbors do without consequence. Sure enough, the very next morning, there was a violation notice taped to my front door in big, bold letters, "Final warning." That was when I realized it wasn't just about rules anymore. It was personal. They had chosen me as their example, and they were determined to make me bend. Little did they know they were setting the stage for their own downfall. Because the day they tried to cross the line from harassment into intimidation, sending so-called officers to my door, they didn't realize the trap they were walking into. They thought they were confronting a helpless homeowner. Instead, they were walking straight into the home of the very man sworn to uphold the law. And unlike them, my badge wasn't fake. It was a Saturday evening, one of those rare nights when I actually had a chance to relax. I had just settled into my living room with a cup of coffee, the faint hum of the TV in the background, when I heard it, 3 sharp knocks on my front door. Not casual. Not neighborly. They carried the weight of authority, the kind of knock that's meant to jolt you upright. I froze for a second, listening. Another round of knocks followed, louder this time, firm and commanding. I set my cup down and walked toward the door, my instincts from years of service kicking in. Even off duty, even at home, I knew the rhythm of a law enforcement knock. But something about this one felt off. When I opened the door, 2 men stood on my porch. They were dressed in dark uniforms, badges clipped to their chests, and heavy belts weighed down with what looked like standard-issue gear. On the surface, they carried themselves like officers, stern faces, squared shoulders, the kind of confidence that comes from believing you hold authority. But my eyes were trained for detail. I didn't just see uniforms. I saw stitching, placement, posture, and small inconsistencies that screamed louder than their fake badges ever could. The first man, tall with a buzz cut, spoke first. "Sir, we need you to step outside. You're in violation of multiple community regulations, and we've been authorized to escort you in for questioning." I raised an eyebrow. Questioning? From an HOA? That alone told me exactly what I was dealing with. These weren't real officers, they were impostors, puppets of the HOA, sent to rattle me. Authorized by who? I asked calmly, leaning against the door frame. The second man, stockier with a poorly fitted vest, cleared his throat. The Homeowners Association Board. You've ignored repeated violations and warnings. This is your final notice. You're coming with us. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I studied them closely. Their badges were cheap imitations, shiny plastic that caught the porch light too eagerly. Their patches didn't match any department I knew of, and the radios clipped to their belts weren't even powered on. To the average person, they might have been convincing enough to instill fear. But to me, they were nothing more than costumed bullies playing dress-up. "I see," I said, keeping my tone measured. "And if I refuse?" Buzzcut smirked, clearly confident in his act. "Then we'll have no choice but to detain you. The HOA has given us full authority." That's when it hit me. These men truly believed they could intimidate me into compliance. They thought the word authority would make me crumble. They thought the threat of being detained would scare me into submission. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I crossed my arms and looked them both in the eye. Years of command presence flowed through me, the same calm steel I'd used in countless real arrests. "Gentlemen," I said slowly, "do you know whose door you're standing at right now?" The stocky one shifted uneasily. Buzzcut just sneered. "Doesn't matter. You're a resident under HOA rules. That's all that matters." I let a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. "You're right about one thing. I am a resident here. But what you don't know," I reached into my wallet, pulled out my badge, and held it up so the porch light gleamed across the polished metal, "is that I'm also the chief of police for this city." The effect was instant. The smug confidence drained from Buzzcut's face, replaced by a flicker of panic he tried, and failed, to hide. The stocky one's eyes went wide, darting from my real badge to his own flimsy imitation, like he'd just realized he was holding a toy gun in the middle of a battlefield. For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint buzzing of a nearby street lamp. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, letting the weight of every word sink in. "You two just committed a federal offense. Impersonating an officer isn't a game. It's not intimidation. It's a crime. And you tried it at the wrong door." Neither of them spoke. They were frozen, caught between the roles they'd been sent to play and the reality of the situation unraveling before them. I could see it in their eyes, the realization that the HOA had set them up, that they had just walked into something much bigger than they had bargained for. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The two men on my porch looked like statues, frozen, rigid, unsure of what to do next. Their whole plan hinged on me being intimidated, on me folding under the pressure of their fake authority. But the moment I flashed my real badge, the balance of power shifted entirely. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. Should they double down on the act? Should they run? Should they apologize? Every option played across their faces in a silent storm of panic. I let them stew in it for a moment before speaking again. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice low and steady, the kind of tone that never needs to rise to be obeyed. "You're going to hand over those fake badges, step off my property, and wait right here while I call in real officers to take your statements. Because impersonating law enforcement is a felony. And I don't take felonies lightly." The stocky one swallowed hard. His hand instinctively moved toward the badge on his chest, then froze. He glanced at Buzzcut, silently asking what to do. Buzzcut tried to hold on to his bravado, but his voice betrayed him with the slightest tremor. "You don't need to involve anyone else. We were just told to deliver a message. That's all." "A message?" I repeated, narrowing my eyes. "That's what you call showing up at someone's home in fake uniforms and demanding they come with you. That's not a message. That's attempted intimidation. And you two are about 3 steps away from wearing real handcuffs." I pulled out my phone, deliberately dialing the number I knew would put me straight through to dispatch. I didn't even need to press call, just the act of doing it was enough. The 2 men instantly shifted, panic flooding their faces. "Wait," the stocky one blurted out. "Please. Just don't. We didn't mean for it to go this far." I lowered the phone, but didn't put it away. "Then start talking," I demanded. "Who sent you? And don't waste my time with lies." Buzzcut exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping as the fight drained out of him. "It was the HOA board," he admitted finally. "They told us you weren't cooperating, that you were breaking too many rules. They said if we made it look official, you'd back down. They promised us a cut from the fines if we made sure you complied." There it was, the confirmation I needed. The board wasn't just issuing petty fines anymore. They had escalated to organized fraud, using fake officers as their muscle. I shook my head slowly, almost in disbelief. "Do you have any idea how serious this is? You didn't just break the law, you tried to weaponize it. And the HOA thought they could hide behind you like cowards." Neither of them spoke. The weight of their choices pressed down on them heavier than any badge or uniform could. I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "You picked the wrong house. Out of every person in this neighborhood, you came here. To me. And now I'm going to make sure the people who put you up to this face consequences you can't even imagine." The stocky one looked like he might collapse right there on my porch. Buzzcut clenched his jaw, but even he couldn't mask the fear anymore. Their fake authority had crumbled, and all that was left were 2 men caught in a trap of their own making. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, straightening up. "You're going to write down everything, every detail, every instruction the HOA gave you. Then you're going to hand over those uniforms and wait quietly for the real officers to arrive. If you cooperate, maybe, the prosecutor will show leniency. If you don't," I let the unfinished threat hang in the air. "Well, I don't need to spell it out." Reluctantly, they both nodded. The fight was gone. The illusion was shattered. As I stepped back inside to grab a notepad, I couldn't help but feel a surge of grim satisfaction. For weeks, the HOA had been trying to bend me to their will with petty fines and intimidation tactics. And now, in one bold but foolish move, they had given me the leverage I needed to bring their whole corrupt operation into the light. The hunters had officially become the prey. And I wasn't about to let them slip away. By the time the 2 impostors finished scribbling down their statements, their hands were shaking so badly that the words were barely legible. The porch light flickered above us, casting long shadows across their faces, as though the night itself was judging them. I took the papers, skimmed the scrawled confessions, and felt a familiar fire in my chest, the same fire I felt every time I saw justice dangling by a thread. The HOA had overstepped in ways that weren't just unethical, but criminal. They weren't enforcing community standards. They were running an organized scam, and they had just tried to weaponize fear against me. That was the last mistake they'd ever make. Within 15 minutes, the sound of sirens filled the neighborhood. Real squad cars pulled into the cul-de-sac, their lights reflecting off windows and freshly painted shutters. Curious neighbors peeked through blinds, their perfect suburban serenity shattered by the flashing red and blue. My officers stepped out, and as soon as they saw me, their posture shifted into respect. I nodded toward the two impostors. "Take them in," I ordered. Charges: impersonating an officer, attempted coercion, and conspiracy to defraud. The stocky one tried to protest. "Wait, we cooperated. We told him everything." "And that will be noted," I said evenly. "But cooperation doesn't erase the crime. You'll have your day in court." The officers cuffed them, reading them their rights as their fake badges clattered to the ground like discarded props from a bad play. The neighbors who had been watching gasped audibly, whispering amongst themselves. Suddenly, all those fines and threats they had quietly endured didn't seem like community rules anymore. They looked like the schemes of a corrupt board exposed in the harshest light. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The next morning, I walked straight into the HOA's monthly board meeting. I didn't go alone. I brought two detectives, a folder stuffed with evidence, and the signed confessions from the impostors. The board members sat around their long polished table, sipping coffee, and pretending they were in control. The HOA president, a smug man with two white teeth and a voice always dripping with condescension, looked up as I entered. "Chief," he said with false politeness. "To what do we owe this visit?" I dropped the folder on the table so hard that half the board jumped in their seats. "You sent impostors to my house," I said flatly. "You armed them with fake badges, fake authority, and a very real intent to intimidate. Do you have any idea how many laws you broke?" The president tried to laugh it off. "Surely you're mistaken. The board doesn't." I cut him off. "Don't lie to me. They confessed. In writing. And every word points back to you." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Another paled. The room was cracking before my eyes. "You thought you could bully residents with fines and threats. You thought you could line your pockets by inventing violations. But last night, you crossed the line from petty harassment into organized crime. And I guarantee you, every agency from the DA's office to federal investigators will know about it by the end of today." The president's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of panic. You wouldn't take it that far." I leaned across the table, my badge catching the light. "I don't bluff. Especially not with criminals hiding behind clipboards." The detectives began handing out subpoenas, their presence a silent confirmation that this wasn't an empty threat. The board's empire of control, built on fear and intimidation, was collapsing in real time. By the end of that week, the HOA's president and two senior board members were facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of funds. The fines they had extorted from residents were traced, documented, and ordered for repayment. The HOA was dissolved under emergency motion, its power stripped away like a mask torn from a thief. The neighborhood changed after that. For the first time in years, people smiled when they passed me on the sidewalk. Neighbors who had once lived in quiet fear stopped by to thank me, relieved to finally be free from the suffocating grip of the board. As for the two impostors, they struck plea deals. Lesser sentences in exchange for full cooperation against the HOA leadership. They would carry the mark of their mistake for the rest of their lives, but they wouldn't be free to play cop ever again. One evening, as I sat back on my porch with a cup of coffee, I looked around at the street, the kids playing without worry, the neighbors chatting freely, the quiet hum of a community finally at peace. I thought about how close the HOA had come to winning, how easily their intimidation might have worked on someone else. But they hadn't realized that fear doesn't work on everyone. Not when the truth and the law are stronger. I sipped my coffee, a wry smile tugging at my lips. They had tried to send fake officers to arrest me. But in the end, it was them who stood trial. Because I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the chief of police. And in my neighborhood, justice would always come knocking louder than fear.